Good afternoon. Welcome to the Archaeology of Connecticut. I'm Glenda Rose, President of Friends of the Office of State Archaeology, here with State Archaeologist Sarah Sportman, former President Scott Brady, and our interesting guests who Sarah will introduce shortly. Today's program is going to educate us about the Historic Preservation Office and Archaeology program at Mohegan. Many of us have found or know others who have found indigenous artifacts while digging for a garden or even on the surface. And we've been excited and intrigued by these items, but what do we really know about the rich history of the tribes who occupied Connecticut? Also, just as important, how should we be embracing the indigenous perspective? Sarah explained to me that for decades, archaeologists have been studying native peoples through their cultural remains, largely without acknowledging that these descendants are still here and have the right to tell their own stories. This really needs to be addressed. I think you'll all agree. So here's Sarah now to introduce our guest and to answer some of these questions.
Thanks, Glenda. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show tonight. We're here with some very special guests to talk about not only the archaeology program at Mohegan, but also their collaborative archaeological field school, which has been running for several years now and is an important and innovative program for educating students about archaeology and also about indigenizing archaeology. So before we get into discussing the field school, I want to introduce our guests tonight. We're joined by James Quinn from the Mohegan Tribal Historic Preservation Office and Archaeology program, and Jay Levy, also from the Archaeology program at Mohegan, and Dr. Craig Cipolla from Tufts University. So I was hoping before we could get started having a discussion, if we could just go around and have each of you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role within the tribe and the field school, and to just talk a little bit about your backgrounds. You want to start, James?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Excited to be here. So my name is James Quinn. I'm the Mohegan Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and the Archaeology Program Manager for the tribe. I'm a member of the Mohegan tribe, a descendant of the Tanaquidgeon family. My great-grandmother was Lillian Tanaquidgeon, and my grandmother was Dorothy Strickland. And so I guess how I kind of got involved is that I always had a great admiration for what my great-aunt Gladys Tanaquidgeon and her brother Harold and her father John, they established and created the Tanaquidgeon Indian Museum in Uncasville, Connecticut in 1931. And also Gladys, among many of her accomplishments, she was an anthropologist in the 1920s. So, and Harold's goal was always to educate and inform people about Native heritage and culture. So, in a lot of ways, I'm grateful to be walking kind of the same, following their footsteps and carrying on the work they were doing. Professionally, I attended my first field school, Mohegan Field School, in 2002. Again in 2003. I interned for the archaeology program for the next 2 summers, and then I graduated from UConn in 2006, and I was hired full-time as the field supervisor. And then eventually in 2011, I took over managing the archaeology program, and I was also named the tribe's first tribal historic preservation officer in that same year.
Akwe Wingan Kisk, Jay Nawisawank. Hello and good day. My name is Jay. Thank you for the invite here. First, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Hamanasset people. I am an indigenous person. My people are 2,500 miles away from here. I am married to a Pequot and Narragansett woman, and I've worked for the Mohegan Tribal Council of Elders for the last 23 years. With the tribe currently, I identify, document, preserve archaeological sites and sacred places on Mohegan lands. I also develop educational programs for the tribal community that include integrating indigenous ideology, tribal tradition, and cultural protocol into land conservation, connecting people to land and place.
Thanks. Craig.
Hi, everyone. My name is Craig Cipolla. Sorry about my voice. I'm losing it. It's the end of the semester. I'm, as Sarah said, I'm a professor of anthropology at Tufts University. I think it's really important to note that I started working with Mohegan in 2010, but they reached out to me when I was a graduate student. I was getting my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. So when I talk about where I've been, it's always connected to the Mohegan. It doesn't always have to be in the future, but it's a really important part of my career. And so I'm really happy to be part of this project. But yes, I'm at Tufts University. Before that, strangely, I was in Canada. I was a curator at the Royal Ontario Museum and an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Toronto. And before that, even stranger, I was in the United Kingdom, where I was a professor of archaeology at the University of Leicester. And throughout all this crazy time, the Mohegan Tribal Historic Preservation Office, especially James, has invited me back every year to do field archaeology together. In a general sense, I've been doing archaeology in the Northeast and Connecticut specifically for just over 20 years. And I've been, again, working with Mohegan, doing archaeology, writing about archaeology since 2010.
Thanks. Did you?
No, I think that we have, that's an impressive group of people that we have here tonight. I can't wait to get into this.
Yeah, so I guess before we start talking about the field school, James, I wanted to delve in just a little bit about the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, and I know that you were the first THPO for Mohegan. We've had the SHPO on, we've had Kathy Levy on to talk about those roles and how it fits into the whole framework of archaeology within the state and federal hierarchy. But can you just explain a little bit about the role of Tribal Historic Preservation Office and how that's different and why it's important?
Sure. Great question. So as you may know or not, the National Historic Preservation Act was amended in '92 to allow for the creation or to create a mechanism for the creation of tribal historic preservation offices. So not all that long ago in the grand scheme of things, right? It creates a funding, like I said, it creates an opportunity for grant funding, and THPO is essentially on tribal land. There's a difference in our roles on tribal land versus off of tribal lands and within our ancestral homelands, and I'll explain that a little bit better. But on tribal lands, essentially reservation and trust lands, we effectively replace the SHPOs on tribal lands. Where that carries more weight in terms of our commenting on projects, on federal projects moving forward on tribal lands. Whereas projects within our ancestral homelands, we are certainly invited and we consult with the federal government on a government-to-government basis. But, we're more of a consulting party rather than, SHPO has signatory power and things like that in terms of their role in the process. THPOs are often the front line for tribes in the battle, in the fight to preserve and protect our sacred, historic, and archaeological sites. We're often reviewing, hundreds to a lot of us are reviewing thousands of projects a year. It's a direct expression of tribal sovereignty. It's, for a long time, tribal people have not had any say as to what goes on or what happens to their cultural heritage. So this is one way or one step towards rectifying that, although albeit the process of tribal consultation is a severely flawed one, it's at least a process that brings tribes to the table. So I think there's a lot of important, THPOs play a lot of important roles. We also play a role in educating tribal youth and reaching out to our community, doing things like this, being here to help, present information to the public. So I think THPOs are, just a very important part of tribal government in terms of, like I said, educating and, preserving our sites.
Yeah, I got to say that it just seems a little bizarre to me that we had, that the tribal peoples had no representation in protecting and preserving their own archaeology. So it's good to see that that's slowly, maybe reluctantly even becoming the way to do things.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and just the incredible amount of responsibility that it places on you is a real challenge, I'm sure.
It is. The volume of projects is as I'm sure Sarah and other folks have worked in preservation and understand, it's just that the volume is the sheer numbers of projects that are happening. Those projects didn't slow down during the pandemic. And for the most part, THPOs are sorely underfunded. The THPO grant is basically, it barely covers a salary, much less, allows for building capacity to keep up with the sheer volume of work you do. And that's just the federal side of things. I mean, like I said, you're working on education, you're doing outreach, you're doing all kinds of other things as well. So, I mean, that's, the unfortunate part being is that they're severely underfunded.
I think archaeology in general is underfunded personally.
That is very true. Yeah, that is very true.
So can you also tell us just a little bit about both you and Jay, if you want to jump in as well, just about the archaeology program at Mohegan, and a little bit about the history of that and how it works?
Sure. jump in whenever, Jay, when you want. So in the early days after federal recognition of the tribe in 1994, the tribe was contracting a lot of archaeology out and that was to reestablish the reservation in our land base and to move forward with economic development. So it initiated reservation-wide surveys. And that went on to about 98, and then, and going back a little bit, 95, the tribe created its archaeology program, which then was just running the field school. That was their first field school in 1995. But so in 98, I think it's about the time the tribal archaeology program starts taking over all archaeological work on a reservation. So we handle survey work, regulatory work, obviously academic-based research. Any projects on a reservation come through the office for review, and if we have to do a survey, then we'll do that in-house, which is, I think, another expression of tribal sovereignty. So yeah, and the early days of the program, the field school's focus was on just producing information solely for the benefit of the tribe. We had gone through a long period of having no say on what happened to our cultural heritage, from the looting in the 20s that took place in the 20s, through the academic-based field schools that took place in the 60s. The tribe had no say and basically no say, no oversight of what was going on. Luckily, we've been able to repatriate a lot of that stuff. But so I think initially, I think it's easy to see why we might turn inward in terms of producing and keeping our information to ourselves. But since working with Craig and we do see a need to start producing some more information. So we've done some publication already. There's talks of more. So we're hoping to open that door a little bit more and kind of and write about the work a little bit more about the work we've been doing.
Yeah, I have to say that and I understand the proprietary concern over that information, but I will say that I think there are a lot of people that I come into contact with that want to be educated about what happened. That I think some of us are actually surprised at how little control or little say or some of the other problems. I mean, it was basically genocide for a long period of time with indigenous people, certainly across North America. And I think we want to know more. So I think hearing it from the tribe as, you guys discover and tell that story could be a really important piece to bridge that and make the non-tribal community more understanding of what's happened and how the tribe ended up in the situation they are, good and bad.
Yeah, I think that is part of the reason how the program was being developed, and the program's still ever evolving. Some people point out that Native Americans are always playing the victim card, and maybe it's because we do have that history of trauma. Real quick point. My people today are being subject to genocidal campaigns and cultural side. And what happened 400 years ago here still happens today. While here in New England, there's many people, many archaeologists that believe that we are imagining these sacred spots or these sacred rocks that are along transmission lines, and they continue to challenge tribal identity and traditional knowledge and oral history. And we're not playing that victim card, but we're protecting what has not yet been stolen. The relationship between Native Americans and archaeologists has traditionally been fraught with tension and conflicting goals, and cultural sites and burials continue to be destroyed and vandalized and looted, as James said. Not too long ago, Mohegans, witnessed their ancestors being dug up and piled up and burned. And not too long ago, my wife, witnessed her Pequot ancestors being dug up. And not too long ago, an Indian skull was displayed on a professor's desk in Connecticut. I've seen indigenous landscapes vandalized and looted and sacred grounds ignored. That's why many tribes and some of the elders at Mohegan don't trust archaeology. And, as we as indigenous archaeologists have accepted a great responsibility to protect our ancestors. And archaeology is a destructive science, and it does have, spiritual implications. So we try to balance those disturbances through different methods that we do during the field school. indigenous people, we understand archaeology. We're going to tell our own story, and assert our own right to tell our story. And I think that's the mission of the field school, is to rectify this discord.
Out of the field schools that you guys have run, I mean, have you had students that have gone on to pursue a career in archaeology? Or
yeah, we absolutely have. So I think what Jay and James were just saying is really important points, that the field school and the tribe's relationship to archaeology has changed. It hasn't always been stable. And I think when we go from the point where we need to take back control, which absolutely had to happen, and then we have another point where you're inviting someone like me. I'm Italian American, by the way. I'm not an indigenous person. Cipolla means onion. And inviting me on and inviting students on is a really important thing. It's not something that is our right. And I try to get students to understand that. I try to get my students to understand that when I walk into a reservation, all that history that Jay just talked about, that's on our back. It doesn't matter if you're the greatest person in the world, or that's an important thing that you have to remember, and you have to build relationships. It takes a long time. But yeah, no, to answer your question, we've had students, we actually did we have a lot of students that go on to archaeology programs from all over the world. We have students at Oxford. We have students at UPenn. We actually have an indigenous student who's Mayan in descent who did a tribal workshop with us in I don't know the year, some year. And he's doing his PhD at Penn, and he's studying 19th century resistant movements in Mexico, which is really neat. So we do have students every year go on, sometimes to contract archaeology, sometimes to graduate programs, MAs, PhDs. And we probably have a handful of PhDs out there that went through our program. And we see them at the conferences, and they've forgiven us for making them dig holes in the hot sun. But absolutely, and I think that's a huge part of. Jay said that archaeology was an extractive science. I agree. It extracts by definition, but I think indigenous and collaborative archaeologies build capacity. So for me, it's not just going in and taking. It's very rarely that, in fact. There's no taking, other than the dirt that's stuck in my body. But it's about donating my time to train those students. And those students might disagree with what we're doing, and they probably do sometimes. But they've had the 6 weeks with us. They sat in the sun with us, shoulder to shoulder. And that's a long time. 6 to 5 weeks is a long time to spend. And they don't think we're trying to do this radical, change. We're just trying to give people space, and I think that's really important for most of our students. And our students are emotionally affected by our work. I'm emotionally affected by our work sometimes, not right now, but sometimes. I think we've been tracking where our students go off to, and it's an important part.
I think we had a program on about 18 months ago that touched on this area. And as I recall, that when dealing with sites attached to the original stewards of our land, that the initial gut reaction was not to disrupt at all. And Jay, you pointed out that there are means through which you can discern what's going on here. What are those techniques that allow you to learn without disrupting? And at what point does one say that that it's worth getting physically deeper into this site?
I don't necessarily know during the time we're excavating or digging that we know. And that's why we take these precautions. And this is what we hope to teach the students is doing archaeology sensitively and responsively and with respect, because some of those things in the ground, do have sacred connections, and we may not know that. So I think it takes time to understand that, after the field school is probably long gone. but we do different. We decolonize archaeological methods by different methods, different ways. We before the field school starts, we often do some ceremony, and we take care of the land, and we take care of the tools that might interrupt the Mother Earth. And as we take things out from the earth, we always give back. Like Craig was saying, where it's not just this way of taking. Our ways are to give. So we always show reciprocity, and those types of ways. We teach those students, and we've seen them at SAA conferences later on, and CRMs, and I'm really very impressed at what I've seen from them and what they've learned, and it touches me that they have taken away a little bit, and learned a little bit of who we are as people, and that's basically it, is respect for the land, respect for each other, respect for our relationships that we're building.
How many people do you guys think have gone through this program since the inception? As
we have some hard
students?
numbers, right?
We have over 100,
Yeah.
definitely. But I would, if I knew, I would have given you the numbers. 'Cause I can easily get the numbers. But we've gone through several phases of just the nuts and bolts of how we run things, and that might be worth just mentioning. When we started, we ran it through UConn, and probably we had maybe 20 students over 2 years. And then we went to the University of Leicester, and we brought British students over for a while. So we had British, American, and Mohegan people, and some other indigenous people too, doing archaeology. And those were big field schools.
Mm-hmm. We've also taken some summers off as well.
Yeah, we took a couple summers off just because, archaeology, sometimes you just need to let it. I think sometimes we have that need to always be digging or to be writing or and it's good to just take a year off and we're about to take a year off where we're not doing a field school. We're actually doing a tribal workshop, which we've done that. This is the second time we'll do that, and it'll be the time when I think I'm the only non-indigenous person usually on site. So it's kind of a magical time, I think, and that's often free, and so get people that aren't necessarily involved at university. Maybe they'll go to university, maybe they'll get involved in CRM, but and then we ran it through the Institute for Field Research, and that was basically getting students from all over the globe again. And now finally we're probably going to start running it. We're looking at Tufts to do a field school through Tufts because it's local and just makes sense, right? But yeah, each one of those has like a different group that we attracted, and I've certainly learned a lot. I mean, one of the most touching moments I've ever had is like walking to the site when there's a British student and a Mohegan student making a map, and the British student kept taking the coordinates, and instead of saying 0, they were saying not. The Mohegan guy said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Wait, I can solve this." So one of the things I learned through collaborative archaeology, I think you can solve a lot of problems through this. I mean, I think in the world we live in right now, everything is so polarized. Either black or white. There's no gray, right? And I think collaborative archaeology expresses these grays in really wonderful ways. Like you might have someone you want to work with, and they might disagree with you on something, and you find a way forward. You find a way to make the method of archaeology that has done violence historically to this place, to not do that anymore.
Right.
And it's just, I know archaeologists aren't going to save the world. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying there's things there that the world could learn from. I really think that's true. And it's not just about what we find; it's about how we do the work.
In the process, yes. Absolutely.
One of the things when we have volunteers or new people come out and work with us in the field, I feel like one of the responsibilities of what we're doing is to have them walk away with an understanding that there is archaeology and there is history and there's stories in the ground of all kinds, whether it's, the indigenous peoples who were here long before Europeans show up, whether it's that contact period where there's very complex, good and bad things going on the landscape, and then moving forward to today. And I think you guys are adding a whole other step beyond that in really recognizing the story of the Native American people who were here, and dealt with a really confusing and hostile time.
Oh, for sure. I mean, to watch. I mean, our ancestors has just watched this field of archaeology build up around them. The study of our ancestors, our heritage, with little to no input, as we've mentioned. Now having an opportunity to contribute and change and help the field evolve and grow, I think is because archaeology is in bad need of diversity all over, right? I mean, from everybody. But I think, obviously, like you mentioned, our part is telling the Native American story to that, and and it's not been a pretty one. We like to acknowledge all the warts and bruises and talk about that and expose it and bring it to the open, because you're right, as you mentioned earlier, that conversation is highly important. People need to understand how it started, to understand, I guess, where we're going, right? I mean,
right. And I think that, as these people leave us, our hope is that, or my hope is when they leave me, is that they'll understand and protect that in their town or wherever they live or where they move to.
Well, one of the things we've actually written about is this tendency in archaeology. Standard archaeology looks at a landscape and doesn't collect anything, and they say it's sterile. Mm-hmm. It's a sterile landscape, and that there's certain connotations that go with that just don't work where we work.
Not at all.
And the truth is, you do need that pattern where there's nothing you're collecting to be in critical dialogue with what people tell you, and what oral tradition tells you, what historical records tell you, what oral history tells you. Well, if this landscape is important and there's nothing on it, well, that's actually telling you something.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Very important. Through nothing, right? And archaeologists don't like to think through nothing, through the lack of things, but it's very important to do that.
Well, we say, right?
Yeah.
Even nothing tells us something,
Yeah.
but we really don't like when we
Data is
find
good
nothing.
data, right?
Absolutely, and there's all kinds of things.
I like finding nothing.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's
Maybe
a lot
I
less
should
work.
be more.
It's a lot less work.
So, I mean, just to kind of take a little bit of a step back, because we've kind of jumped right into the meat of things, but I mean, just to take a step back and talk a little bit more explicitly about the field school program.
Okay.
So, typically archaeological field schools are designed to put students in a practical field-based situation, right, and give them training in basic archaeological field methods, excavation, mapping, recording data, that kind of thing. And that is typically extractive, right? It's typically based on taking data out of the ground and making up a story about it. I'm not making up necessarily, but you know what I mean. But also, there's an element of storytelling to all archaeology. But I think that, a lot of that is driven by research questions that people have, right? And historically, a lot of those research questions have just been things that archaeologists have been curious about. Like, I wonder why. And I mean, I think that, what I want to know, and what I would like you to explain for us is how your field school program, being collaborative, and putting everybody together in the field in a situation where people are spending, if any of us, we've all worked in the field, how quickly you get to know people and how intense that experience can be, how that is different from a typical archaeological field school.
Well, so we don't just, for one part, I think one point is that it's not just about the field work and the archaeology. We incorporate tribal elders come speak to the class. We have included in the past a wampum making day for students to, traditional skills and traditional wampum making. We incorporate certain sensitivities in terms of not cutting down smaller saplings and trees just to get to an excavation unit. We incorporate, as Jay was talking about, sensitivities, smudging our tools every day, leaving tobacco. So I think that, that framework is what makes it a little bit different.
Jay has the students dance at least once a year.
That's right. We have traditional drumming and dancing and singing that we also practice. We did some lateral throwing this past summer.
I want to come and dance on Dance Day next year.
So, I mean, it's...
You never know. It's not scheduled. It just shows up.
So, we also want the students to not feel like we're bringing them here to... obviously to teach them, but not just to use their labor, because a lot of field schools really are just
right, that's a
labor
good
mills, right?
I left that one out, but that is very true.
We take them into the Mohegan community and take them into our homes and take them into our, and take them into Mohegan, and they become a part of the tribe for that little short period. At least they're gonna come away with a better understanding of who we are, and so it's never just about the archaeology or in the field, the nuts and bolts of excavating and mapping and things like that. So there's always that framework built up around it that I think certainly makes it different than most field schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's certain methodological things that we always cover,
Right.
but you can cover those anywhere,
Right.
pretty much, and my students and graduate students especially are always asking me, like, how do you do collaboration? And I always say, like, look, when you're working, like, excavating at the site, go look at what Jamie and I are doing, or Jay and I are doing. We look like we're not doing work, but we're working. Just listen, students, we're working. We're over there talking. And it looks like we're not doing much, but that's where the magic is happening, right? That's where we're working through a problem,
Right.
or like, what are we going to do? That's where it is. It's like in the fields in the middle of the day. That's where a lot of that happens. And so we talk a lot about what we're doing. We talk about the future. We talk about how our interests overlap. They're not always the same.
Right.
And we recognize that. But, our field school, since we've run it together, we always have the same basic like methodological rhythm. We teach our students how to hold a compass, which takes a long time. Now that smartphones are here, we teach them how to walk a straight line, how to keep count of their paces, all hard skills to acquire. And they do pedestrian survey with us for a while. Then they do some shovel test pits. We don't make people do a certain amount. We're like, we need to do 175 because we're not doing CRM archaeology. We're just teaching them the skills.
Preparing them for CRM.
And then we do some excavation, and we probably don't do that much excavation. Even we work pretty slowly. We used to work a lot. We used to do a lot more when I was like really pushing people. Then I met Jay, and he told me to stop working so hard. And I agree. He's right.
I think we're very conservative in terms of the amount of excavation we do at sites. We
don't do a ton. We do,
But that goes to Jay's point of trying to protect some of the landscape, right? Sometimes doing nothing is the right thing to do for a particular site.
I like to introduce the concept I like to call akiwi etopotam, which is the land is sacred, and I try to introduce it to understand the history of where we are, on Mohegan land, and how we take care of the land and how the land takes care of us, and those connections with the land and with the relationships that we have with the land, because those are the relationships that we are working on, the earth and the land and archaeology. So I think that concept of the land being sacred is something else that we introduce along with the archaeological methods.
Yes, all the time. It's not necessarily the artifacts that make a place important for us all the time. We have many important places that we've done some archaeology where we found, no artifacts, which, like Craig was mentioned earlier, tells us a lot. It's the land, it's the place that's important. It's not necessarily the things that are in the ground.
Right.
And to Jay's point about sometimes we never know. Most archaeologists don't know what they're going to find. That's why they're doing the archaeology in some degree. But we might need to spend a winter thinking about what that was. We don't go in and blast in 30 1-by-1 units and just open up a whole site. We might open 7 to 10, spend the summer on those, and then come back to the site in 2 years. So we always have we never spend. That's the thing. Like with those 3 phases of walkover, survey, shovel test, excavation, they very rarely happen all in the same place. We're always moving across the reservation. That's another thing that's really important for the students to understand these different landscapes. When elders visit and say, "Oh yeah, this is where I hunted," or "This is," they'll share stories about that. And I think that's a really important part about what we do, just to get the geography of Mohegan, because it's really complicated, because there's development too in Uncasville that we have to work around. Certainly.
So, traditionally in archaeology, when people have done archaeological projects on indigenous land, on indigenous sites, the research goals have been defined, as I was saying before, from the interest of academic archaeologists or for development purposes, right? We have to do it because something is going to go here and destroy what's ever there. But so how do you, internally decide on your own land, your research directions? What kinds of sites do you...
That's a great question. We've been working on historic sites. Craig's a historic archaeologist, right? And I don't want to box you in.
I doubt. I don't want to box you. I don't like boxes, so let's not do that. But I think.
Personally, I just think that Native history in general is kind of always relegated to pre-contact and colonial, right? The colonial era. I like looking into the post-colonial area. How are Mohegans adapting to this environment, post-colonialism? What's going on? What can we see in the day-to-day life in those households, and kind of bring those day-to-day Mohegans to life and share and learn more about what life was like for them. Are they maintaining traditions? What might that look like in the archaeological record? So I think it's a very important time that's not really discussed all that much.
Well, right? Last of the Mohegans, right? There's this effort to try and say, well, all the native people are gone now, so it's okay for us to really be here and have everything. So I think that post-colonial period is really important to say that these people are here, they never left, they're still surviving.
That's a good point, because we were basically also taken out with the pen, right? Pen and paper, erasure via pen and paper. So not you would see the last full-blooded passes here and the last full-blooded such and such is so erasure was happening physically and also by, like I said, by pen and paper. So but we're still here.
Right. Well, that's a really convenient argument to make, because as soon as there's any kind of influx of people, the last full-blooded always goes away.
Yeah.
There's no last full-blooded Scotsman anymore. I hate to say it, but
dubious argument to say the least, but for sure, yep.
And it's worth probably mentioning, like, we're actually studying what many people would say later periods. So we spend a lot of time in the 19th century.
That's true.
We do some 18th century. We don't touch the 17th. We haven't touched the 17th century in a while.
Nope.
We even have written about the 20th century.
Yep.
So we've done a little bit of everything, and those houses are really important. I mean, one of the biggest, and I'm sure that James will be able to share some insights on this, or Jay. But the household we're working on now, I mean, the people that live there, you can see them. They're impacted by allotment. So they have a wall that cuts their house in half in 1872 when the allotment wall goes through. So that's essentially one of the themes that I think keeps coming up, is this idea of parceling out land and the impacts of that, and building up to that 18th century and then 19th century when it starts to happen. So and what does that house look like? Well, it's Mohegan history. It's Mohegan land. I mean, whenever people come to historical archaeological sites, as Sarah can attest, someone like the UPS man might come by and see you digging, and they're going to say, well, who lived here? Who lived here? Which artifact is owned by that enslaved African who lived on that plantation? Well, here's the thing, folks. We still don't know. Yeah. And here's the other thing. If I'm looking at a stone wall that cuts across Mohegan land, it doesn't matter who made it. It's Mohegan history. Yeah. That building that wall affected Mohegan history. Yeah.
I want to, for the listeners that don't know Mohegan history, can you tell them a little bit what the allotment was and what the impact was?
Sure. I mean, it's a long. I'm trying to.
Can you condense it?
How can I condense the erosion of the native land base?
I can give like the general framing.
Sure,
I mean, it's a story that happens in all across North America.
Mm-hmm. Sure
So I was just teaching my students about the outcomes on the West Coast, but it's a similar pattern. It happens a lot later on the West Coast, essentially, but for various reasons, groups are given individual plots. Mm-hmm. And someone, usually a non-tribal person, pretty much always a non-tribal person, but I don't believe in universals, but I'm going to say mostly a non-tribal person, decides how many acres of land someone needs to sustain a living in a Euro-colonial way. Then they look at the land that people have, and they say how many people are in the tribe, how many families, and they break up the land, and then whatever's left over, usually a large chunk, they sell it off for the good of the tribe, or so, and then that's very hard to get back, right? So most indigenous people associated with allotment, you'll find that their history, they have one like piece of land that goes to allotment, and then their communally held land might shrink to like the size of a postage stamp on a map or something, and then it's building that land base back up. So I don't know, Jamie, if you have details to add about Mohegan's story, but
that's after post Pequot War, there's a void left by the war leaves a void, and Mohegan kind of fills that void, takes over land kind of east of the Connecticut River, former Pequot lands, former River Indian tribes lands. And eventually just encroachment continues to happen. The state and the colony at the time, they do come to an agreement. They establish a certain amount of acreage that the tribe will always have, and some fancy wording to theirs and unto theirs and forevermore, which is never the case. But the the reservation was dissolved in 1872, and that's when the allotments were created. And
so the new owners come through and put like a wall right through.
Well, the overseers in the state, they create the they create the reservation, they lot out the lands, and they create the stone walls, build the stone walls, which I would imagine that a lot of Mohegans are actually building those walls as well. So yeah, and so that happened, like Craig mentioned, across the country. I think it was the Dawes Act. I think it was the Allotment Act, and so that's a pattern that takes place. But you also see at one point tribal members advocating for allotment because they think it's the only way they can hold onto the land. Mm-hmm. So there's that kind of twist in terms of allotment, because the decisions you had to make. I mean, trying to hold on to what you can, and unfortunately, when there's no economic opportunity, the last thing to go is the land. I mean, that's the last thing you have that you're holding on to.
Yeah, and when you look at those documents, oftentimes, especially in this part of the world, it's women who are doing that work and advocating for that, because the men are not around. They're on whaling ships. They're other places, and so it's the women that are leading the charge. And we do actually have households we think are associated with certain women that are actually signing some of these documents, that they're going to the Connecticut General Assembly and making that argument. And it's also the argument of, I can't worry about everyone has access to land. Now I need to be, this sort of nascent form of capitalist, using land is coming, and we need to adopt that. And then it often does backfire. You get to leasing land and things like this.
Yeah, and I would think too that a lot of what's going on is driving families away from their ancestral lands or the reservation lands, because if you're given, let's be honest, there's some uphill lands that someone's trying to farm and make a living off of. That certainly can't happen. We see it happen with European settlers, that the fifth son gets the top of the mountain and he goes to Ohio because there's no way you're growing anything up there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So you also had as Norwich and London are growing up around Mohegan Reservation, right? Mohegan's essentially in the middle, in between Norwich and London, which were obviously growing and flourishing, industrial cities in that time. So you have those pressures kind of on both ends as well, kind of just hastening that and just pushing that, moving that along faster. I mean, it's amazing. There's what is left. I mean, it's amazing what is left out there, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I think going back to Sarah's question on like research questions, some of the stuff that we talk about often is there's a lot of archaeologists that have been writing about Eastern Pequot and Mashantucket Pequot homes from 18th, 19th century. But, so some of our interests starting out is like, well, what is Mohegan? Given the fact that on that side of the Pequot River, the Thames River, they don't have those major. They don't have New London and Norwich on either side of them. So it's just going to be a different pattern going on. So that's some of the questions we have is about what does 18th and 19th century Mohegan history look like, or indigenous history on this side of that side of the river look like. And
one of those places that we were studying those questions was at Pomachog this summer. And Pomachog is a place that was it lies south of Shantok and is along the Pequot Seapost, the Thames River, and it was Uncas's territory, and he ended up giving it to James Rogers in 1658. Some of that territory also becomes Mohegan villages, Ben's and Johnstown, and then later on, the allotment comes around, and it's allotted to William Fielding and Fidelia Fielding, the tribal matriarch of the tribe, language keeper. And so those are the questions that we're looking at currently at Pomachog. Is we just started there, and we're finding
it's complicated.
Yeah, there's a lot of old occupation, a lot of 20th century occupation, and a lot of Apona and Sakuyaga, a lot of oyster and shell, hard clam shell. But yeah, those are some of the questions that I'm interested in, is especially that part of that land, that place of running water, and connecting the tribal community, Mohegan tribal community, back to that, but to that land. Some of these projects that we do are for development on the reservation, and some of them are for having the tribal community reconnect to these places.
So kind of going back to a thing that you touched on in the beginning, about sharing information that you're learning as you go through this process, and thinking back to what we were just talking a little bit about, particularly these 19th and 20th century sites, which is sort of in many ways, a lost period of history for Indigenous people, right? Because even now, they do a much better job, right, in the school system teaching about Indigenous history, but it still seems like there's the pre-European period, and then there's today, and then there's the it's like people are gone and then all of a sudden they're back in like the 90s or something. Right. So I mean, I think what is the kind of, I don't know how to ask this the best way, but a strategy for, or plans maybe for, sharing that history in a way that helps people understand that there's that continuity, that people were always here, that they were always living here, and that didn't suddenly just reappear with federal recognition.
So I think there's the balance that's it's hard to strike sometimes, right? What's enough information, what's not enough. And, I first should say that anything we publish, I have to get approval from my council of elders. We worked at their behest and under them. So anything we propose to publish or write about or has to be approved. So, thankfully I have some help in that, making those decisions. But we do believe, like you're saying, there is a need to tell what was going on in Mohegan during that time period. And I think that, there's a little bit of there's a knowledge gap there in terms, because like Craig was saying, we understand a little bit from Steve's work across the river at Eastern Pequot. We understand maybe what was going on there a little bit, even at Mashantucket, but nothing, as far as I know, has really been written about the historic period or, this time period, archaeologically, at least at Mohegan. So we do think that's an important to share. It's just figuring out what that looks like, I think, is our next step. And
yeah, and we do it. We don't do it all at once. Obviously, we do it in small bits, and we're at a time in our collaborative relationship where we're kind of we all live in the same place basically. So we can for the first time in about 12 years, we're all in within a couple 100 miles, I guess. It's a time when we're rethinking how everything works. But I think we're at a point where we're going to start sharing some more information. It seems like there's interest in that. So we take it at, we're finishing up a bunch of site reports that need to be finished, and then from there we'll see where it goes. But it seems like there's definitely things that we're not interested in talking about. I think we already know that, but it's just a question of like what are the contours of the things that will be shared, and that's obviously in the hands of the elders and Jamie, and I don't worry about that too much. I just we just talk through it.
Yeah.
We just talk through it. Yeah.
And I would expect there's a lot of demand that this be educational to the tribal people first before.
Oh, absolutely there is. And being a smaller program, we do struggle with outreach a little bit, but we're looking at ways where we can increase that outreach to our membership. And pre-pandemic, we were Jay's, who worked in our cultural department for many years before coming over, is great at putting together programming, especially targeted for our tribal youth. We've done campouts at important places like Mohegan Rock with tribal youth, and none of them had ever been there. None of them ever camped, and so that's something they'll take away as a memory they'll have forever. Like, remember that time we went to Mohegan Rock, and that's a sacred place for the tribe. And so those are some types of things we try to do, and we've given talks to the membership in the past, and we hope to start doing that again. But yeah, you're right. It's informing the membership first, I think, is our priority, and then getting information out to the public, I guess, comes after that.
So I have a question that, I mean, in some ways it's obvious, and I think Craig's already answered it, by talking about, how you do collaboration, right? And it starts with talking and listening and conversations and that kind of thing. But, I think most younger students that are coming up through archaeology now, they understand the complicated and fraught history of the field, most people, I think, at least that I've interacted with, have, really wanted to do it differently and do it better. They're still really interested in being archaeologists and finding a path forward, within the field, but in a way that is respectful and collaborative with Indigenous people. And I think one thing that a lot of students struggle with is how to start that conversation. And I think, I'm just wondering if you have any advice for younger students or scholars that want to reach out and start a dialogue.
I think it's really not rocket science. It's there's two things here, but it's not rocket science. The first one is that it's about just being a human being and being very honest. Most people, you have expectations when you know about the history of what archaeology was. It's becoming something else, hopefully. But you have to remember that history, and you just have to be honest about what you want. And I think I told Jamie, I think I told you a long time ago, I work at a university. So there's certain things, and we found a way around that. But I think there's something else going on, that I think the structures of where these people get their training has to change. So whether you're a graduate student who wants to do collaborative archaeology, or you're an early career scholar who's starting a tenure track job at a university, those universities have to support collaborative work. They have to understand that it might take that early career scholar 12 years to get tenure. They have to understand that the graduate student, their plans might fall apart, and then at that point, you have to start over. So they have to have a support network that's better and more robust. And that's something that's still being built up very much. But more and more universities, big universities, are open to this. We have people doing this type of work at most universities now, and that's a good thing. And they're saying the same thing I'm saying, like, we need to have more room. It can't be the same one-size-fits-all type of academic production that you're expecting. Now, I've been lucky enough to get a lot of stuff out, and I don't always write about Mohegan, but I learn everything I write is something I learned. It's shaped by that, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? So there's that too. I mean, there's just finding, common ground where everyone can agree, or that kind of thing. By the way, I should also mention one of the things that I never learned anything directly about repatriation from Mohegan, but yet I just spent 6 years doing repatriation in Canada with First Nations, and I take great influence from this relationship that we had. And I would call these two sometimes, be like, what the heck do I do with this problem?
Because on top of the archaeology in THPO, we're also handle a lot of the NAGPRA for the tribe as well.
Yeah.
Which is a whole complicated.
That's a whole nother.
That's a whole other show.
Yeah, well, especially in Canada where there's no legislation.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I answered that question enough, but yeah, I mean, I think.
So I would add also that we have been working with and reaching out, and universities have been reaching out to us. We had some folks from Quinnipiac come visit the office the other day. Dave, who works in our lab, he's a Yale student, and so he had the Yale Anthropology Department come and visit with students. So, so yeah, we've been working with, doing some outreach to universities as well, and trying to expose our students to what we're doing.
Great. We're giving a talk at Harvard in the spring. 3 of us.
Yes. Oh, that's right too.
Yeah. Oh, they forgot. So I reminded them.
Could I ask our guest, what's your hope for the program, over the next 4 or 5 years for the future?
That's a great question. Personally, I would love to see some more Native students come through our program. It's hard to, whether it be cultural or economic barriers. We've always tried to improve that. But that being said, I think that as long as we continue at least to move the ball forward in terms of helping the field evolve and just creating that space that we can have discussions and not necessarily agree on everything, but at least have that discussion and learn from those discussions.
Yeah, I would hope that the collaboration continues and throughout my lifetime, and continues after us. I would hope to more Mohegan tribal peoples. We've had a lot come through, seasonal jobs and volunteers, and they're always asking to come back, and they continue to volunteer throughout the year. And like James says, more indigenous peoples learning these archaeological ways. And with this intertribal program, archaeological program that, and especially this summer that we're having with the tribal workshop, I think that brings a lot of indigenous people together, not only to learn archaeology, but to become aware of and learn about environmental concerns and socio-political issues facing other different tribal nations. And I think that's important. And I just hope that, that non-indigenous peoples continue to work. We all work together.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the important things to know about collaborative archaeology from my perspective is when it's over, it's over. So you never know. We might not be here in 5 years, but I hope it is. But I think you have to always remember that when it's time to go, it's time to go. Mm-hmm. So we'll be in touch at least.
Got a lot of rating to do.
I hope we're still there. Yeah, I hope we're still there.
So if someone's listening, and especially if they're indigenous and interested in archaeology, is there a contact for this program? I know maybe you're not going to be in the field this year, but for them to maybe reach out and get some information?
Well, they can always look Craig Cipolla up on the website, and you can find my email at Tufts and email me. And I can put you in contact with Jamie. If I don't know if you want to give any information.
Yeah, sure. jquinn@moheganmail.com, all lowercase.
I'm not going to go that far.
I get enough email anyway. It doesn't matter. It won't matter if I get more. I mean,
there you go.
Yeah, and stop by the Tanaquidgeon Museum,
yes.
the Mohegan Tribal Museum, and also the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. Mm-hmm. Those are good starts.
Yeah, they really are. They're great facilities.
Yeah. Well, as always, you can find Office of State Archaeology on our Facebook page and at osa.uconn.edu.
And if you're interested in finding FOSA, you can follow us on Facebook or our website, fosa, fosa-ct.org.
Thanks, everybody.